The timeline.
The timeline of things. Yes, the timelines of people that are in tonight's film. And who's here as well? Who's in tonight? Well, you're in the spoiler room. Thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, grabbing your favorite drink, and talking movie spoilers with us. Yes, we have put behind us the family that slays together. And this month in September, it's so lifelike. Yes, that's right. We are looking at art and horror this month, mostly involving wax figures or amusement attractions. We got a lot of, I think, interesting films. I'm hoping they're interesting. I hope you find them interesting and my crew find it interesting, because they're films that I find interesting, maybe not great, but interesting. And there is a line in there, and help me define that line or erase that line is with me, as always, the man keep coming back for more, our good friend, Mr. Ian Simmons. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about this movie, which I don't know if we've actually named yet. Have we?
We
House
have
of
not.
Wax.
Well, they can't read the title. It says it right in the title. The House of Wax, 2005, starring Alicia Cuthbert, and also appearances by Paris Hilton and Chad Michael Murray, among a few others.
And Jared Padalecki. Come on, Supernatural's Jared Padalecki.
Okay, I never watched Supernatural. My wife has. I have not, because I don't have 14 seasons of my life to devote to an entire series. Don't get me wrong. I've got friends who love the series. Mad props to them. I'm like, maybe when I retire, I'll sit down and watch them all or binge them, but I've got so much to watch, man. I don't know if I can do 14 seasons or 15, however many it ran.
I can only vouch for the first season. I think I watched a little bit of the second season, and I just it kind of dropped off. But it's good. It's solid.
That's
CW
what I hear.
Horror TV, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There's nothing. See, there's nothing wrong with CW TV, and that is like comfort food. It's like you know kind of what you're getting, and that's okay, because usually there's some kind of entertainment involved with it most of the time. And it makes you, revisit your youth, or what you wish your youth would have been for some of us. And we got Infobomb in the house tonight. So glad you could join us as always, Robert. And yes, House of Wax, 2005, from the director who brought us Jungle Cruise recently, and is the upcoming Black Adam. So there you go, folks. There's some bringing it back around to current events. Yam Colette Sierra, I think I
Jean Colette
Jean, thank you. Jean Colette Sierra.
Serra.
Thank
Gotta
you.
pronounce it with that kind of like an L thing to get to the French. Yeah.
Jean Colette is Sarah. See, I wish I had a cool name like that. My name's Mark Krachik. It sounds like you're going over a speed bump with crackers in your hand, and you accidentally crunched them when you went over the speed bump, and they fell on the ground, and then you're trying to clean up the dust, and then you go over the spikes. That's what Mark Krachik sounds like. It sounds like a freaking venereal disease. But anyway, which I did get that nickname in high school. But anyway.
Oh, my God.
Not that name, but they called me Crotch Checker. So, there's worse things. Yeah.
Well, that's because you hung out in the girls' bathroom.
I did not.
All the time? No. Sorry.
All the time. That we know of. No.
That was House of Wax. That was
a different wax.
Yes.
Anyway, speaking of wax, since you are here, sir, I would like you to give us a synopsis of House of Wax, if you could, please.
I bet you would, but I'm not gonna. No.
Okay, fine. Be that way. We'll just sit here in silence for an hour.
So, Jean Colette Serra, riding high on the zeitgeist of the horror remake of the early 2000s, really loved the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And thought, I would love to remake the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a CW actress running around a white tank top, sweaty and bloody. But that Jessica Biel and the remake from a couple of years earlier had already beaten me to it. So what I'll do is I'll just take the title House of Wax and turned it into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And that's the synopsis of this movie.
It is redneck horror. It is a genre, folks. Redneck, backwoods horror. It definitely is. And watching it again this time, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, it the thing is, there's watching it again, especially for the show tonight. My feelings initially were, okay, we watched it and it got probably a lot more wide release than it should have, probably because it had Paris Hilton in it, which a year before the infamous movie came out, One Night in Paris. And she had done work before that, don't get me wrong, but she was still in the media. It was in the news, and her along, they put her in a horror film like this with a bunch of young, experienced, but still kind of up and coming. They were just exploding onto the scene, this cast. I mean, later on, they would go on, and they're still acting today in a lot of very popular shows, some movies, but definitely TV shows from this film. They really exploded onto the scene, though they were experienced beforehand. So this is a really interesting film. There's talent involved. It's not like they got a whole bunch of new people who only had maybe one film under their belt. And it's a mixed bag for me. How'd you feel about it?
I liked the movie a lot more watching it the other day for this show, and it was the first time since I'd seen it in the theater in 2005. And I didn't really care for it back then, I think, because, as I mentioned, it was part of the zeitgeist of these big screen horror remakes.
Texas Chainsaw came out like just 2 or 3 years before this, right? Was it like 2003, I think?
Right. Plus we had, there were like Saw sequels, and like I wrote an essay for a book that I don't even know if it made the cut, but I had to go back and delve into like early 2000s horror and like the different genres and spin-offs and sequels and things like that. And I forgot just how much the multiplex, like the marquees, were dripping with blood every weekend, because there was always some new horror to go see. And the benefit was, hey, there's new big screen horror every week. The drawback is, if you immerse yourself in enough of that stuff, then eventually by the time you get to like House of Wax in 2005, it's just like, yeah, it's another Texas Chainsaw style ripoff with, rednecks, and there's a spooky place, and, underground layers, and guy with a mask, and this secret family history and all this other stuff. But, 15 years removed from that, it's pretty cool. And I think part of it, honestly, is the time capsule thrill of it, because the amazing thing watching it now is all the people, like the main cast, were all like youth from popular TV shows. Alicia Cuthbert came from 24 on Fox. Chad Michael Murray was on One Tree Hill on the CW. Jared Padalecki was on Gilmore Girls. And then Paris Hilton was on Some Guy's Jock.
Well, she had done she had done a few other small roles and such, before this, in fact,
but they cut it all together into the same tape, Mark.
Well, thanks.
But no, it was around this time, I think, she did The Simple Life with Nicole Richie and all that. So it's it's fine. It's just, it's cool now to go back and see that, especially because now all these people are in their 40s, to see them all like, they're like all 22 and hot and everything. And I was surprised at how long this movie is. It's almost 2 hours.
Thank you. Yes, it surprised me too when I looked at the runtime. I didn't remember it being I'm like, holy crap, an early 2000s horror film that's almost 2 hours long? That's, now you're like, oh, yeah, that's, it's less than 2 hours. Oh, man, that's, short run time for a modern horror film. And you're like, but back then that was, getting long in the tooth as far as the time, runtime for it.
Yeah. And, I think it's pretty good. You maybe could trim some stuff here and there, but I kind of feel weird getting down on a horror movie that takes its time getting places and really tries to immerse the viewer in, the story and everything. But it does feel, like you mentioned, kind of a bit long in the tooth.
Because in the beginning we get introduced, we get this flashback scene with kid and abusive parents, and that we don't know really the context of how these characters play into things later. And then you get your title, and then we get our group of youth, college folks who are headed to a football game somewhere. It's going to be the game of the year. And of course, as always, like you said, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre formula, they decide to try to take a shortcut and run afoul of some, folks who live in the backwoods. There's an abandoned town, which was kind of cool. I loved the set design and the production, actually, of this. I thought the visual aesthetics were great.
Yeah, but the weird thing is, and this is no fault of the movie because the movie I'm about to reference didn't exist yet, but it reminded me of the 2021 Texas Chainsaw Massacre Netflix thing where they had the
Yes,
abandoned
yes.
town
Mhm.
that's connected to this crazy family or whatever. I just kept having flashbacks to that. But yeah, the Wax Museum is great. I mean, the logo of the movie is like the kind of the bloody wax kind of popping through. I don't know if that was early CGI or if that was like practical effect that was just made to
Mhm.
look really cool and smooth. But yeah, I mean the house itself is really neat. Like the conceit is the entire thing is made out of
Made of
wax, which is
wax.
neat. Yeah.
which is that wonderful early 2000s foreshadowing. Look, I'm all for foreshadowing. I know it's a major tool in filmmaking, but sometimes you're in a horror film, they go into the film, the building, and they make it a point a number of times saying, wow, everything's made of wax. You're like, oh, that shit's melting. Even if you never watched the movie before, you're like, oh, at one point something's gonna melt in this building, if not the whole building. They brought it up that it could melt, wax like 2 or 3 times. Oh, it's made of wax, which plays into it later because one of the characters ends up running from the killer and he's trying to throw plates at him, but the plates are wax, so they don't have the same effect as ceramic plates.
Oh yeah, and you get like at the climax when everything is on fire. I think Chad Michael Murray is trying to run upstairs, but his feet are sinking into the stairs. It's almost like the Nightmare on Elm Street glue stairs
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, it's some cool ideas.
But yeah, the whole idea of the abandoned town, and yes, folks, this is a spoiler room if you hadn't caught the title. We learned that these two brothers are the only two people in town. Everybody else were people that they made into wax figures. Um, that's a creepy concept. And like I said, the buildings and everything in the town, I loved it. That you've got a film, whatever was it, whatever happened to Baby Jane is the film that's stuck playing at the theater, which I thought was a great creepy film to include in here. There's a lot of great elements in here. And then there's some not so great. It's like it's a mixed bag for me to where I'm like, it's trying to be, a slasher, a more modern slasher, and it's got the elements in there, but it does stumble a bit along the way.
I can't. I'm having trouble separating this from a lot of the other movies we've kind of talked about.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, I love when we get to see Jared Padalecki's character. He's the
Mhm.
boyfriend of Alicia Cuthbert. I should probably actually bring up the names of these characters, but honestly, who cares?
Well, they got great CW names. You've got Nick, Paige, Carly, Bo is the Brian Van Holt. He's one of the two brothers. You got
Yeah,
Dalton
the
and
other brother,
Wade.
Vincent, which is probably a
Vincent.
reference to
Oh yeah.
Vincent Price. Yeah,
That's the only real connection you have to the original house.
yeah. But so Jared Padalecki's character ends up. And there's a reference, not a reference, but sort of a hostile motif
Yep.
because there was something going on in the early to mid 2000s of people getting their Achilles heels tendons sliced open with giant scissors. He gets, kind of incapacitated, ends up in this chair and this elaborate contraption in the basement that he basically coats his body in wax for this process. And I watched that, and it's beautifully lit. It looks kind of like the lair from Jeepers Creepers with a bit
Mhm.
of the mechanics from a Saw sequel, and just this kind of a terrifying idea of being trapped in this hot, sticky stuff that's hardening, and you can't get out. And then there's a bit of a comedy bit where the one of the doofus best friends discovers him in the house of wax and it's like kind of touching him, and it peels off a bit of his cheek, and then he starts peeling off more of his cheek by accident, just coming off in sheets, and you can see the guy, his eye just like rolling up in the back of his head. You can't tell if he's dying or if he's like, what an idiot.
And he's got a little tear too. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a severe scene, and that, you know, Vincent ends up, he's hiding there because he knew Dalton was coming. This is the guy, of course, we're talking early 2000s, so of course he has a handy cam, which he videotapes, which, you know, is just kind of his shtick. It doesn't really play into anything except maybe later, you know, it kind of brings things back around at the end, but not really. But
yeah, I mean, it's like we saw this in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead a year earlier. You know, the whole like handy cam thing is
you've got the one friend with the video camera, which I take, you know, okay. You know, if it wasn't me, it was my buddy Doc, who I've known since, you know, forever, and he always had the cam as well. So, you know, because you never know when you can film something, and you know, he does that, and Dalton does that, and Dalton's the one that peels the skin away from Wade, which is interesting. Vincent is the artiste of the two brothers that are taking over this town, but he's not who you think he is based off of the introduction, because in the introduction scene we don't get to see anyone's faces. One brother in the high chair is acting very good. He's the good boy or whatever. And then there's other one who's very violent. And so, of course, they try to lead you to believe, well, Vincent is the one who is the violent one. But of course, no, it's Bo, kind of that Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation, where the good looking guy, well, is actually the craziest one.
Yeah. And they were like conjoined twins, and
they were conjoined twins by the face, and they were Siamese twins. Yeah,
right. And that's why Vincent is, you know, very much deformed, because I think they removed his face from like the back of Bo's head or something like that.
He's missing. He actually later on, when the mask gets removed from Vincent, he's actually missing like a chunk of his face. It's fairly good CGI for 2005.
Yeah,
you know, peeled away. But yeah, it's an interesting way they were conjoined. Kind of playing off of the whole beauty idea. That's why you have the wax. You know, he's the artiste, and he makes all these people look good, even though they're alive inside wax.
or they were. I mean, at one point, like I think it was in the movie theater, one of the wax figures gets their head blown off, and you see like bugs and stuff crawling out. Which, if they were sealed in wax, I don't know how that happens. I can only imagine maybe that was like an earlier work. They hadn't quite got the seal down.
I'm thinking it was, or, you know, I mean, they were at it for years. So, you know, some of those may have just worn out in time. You know, wax does break down a bit. So, and if the bugs smelt something, you know, even if there was a little part in the wax that they could smell, they could have crawled into there.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's a cool premise. I did like it's not misdirection, but there's a nice callback when was it Carly and Wade first, they are going into town. They get a ride from this, you know, the creepy redneck. I guess it's the Roadkill Driver is his name, played by
they
Damon
call him
Harriman.
Roadkill. Yeah, Roadkill Driver. He's a hook later on.
Huh? A hook?
Well, not a hook, but a leave it open for a sequel.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. They were actually triplets. But so he offers to give the two of them a ride into town because the fan belt on the car broke and they're stranded.
Mysteriously, yeah.
Yeah, mysteriously. So they get part way. The guy smells. He's kind of awkward, and just they're getting this creepy vibe off of him. He takes them down this path, and he's like, "Wait, where we go? Why are we stopping here?" He's like, "Oh well, we gotta venture just a little bit further, and the town's just like right around that area there." And like, I don't like where this is going. We're just gonna get out and walk. So they walk. They go into town. They find this creepy town. They find a church because I hear music coming out of it, I think, and they go up to it to try and find help. and they go in and they see like this congregation, and they see a priest up front, and they see Bo kneeling down, and it's very clearly a funeral going on.
Yeah.
What I love is that the priest like looks up at them kind of disapprovingly, like, "What are you doing here?" And then Bo turns around and sees them, and he eventually follows them out. Much later, when they go into that same church, they realize that it was all fake. Like everybody in there was, wax corpses, even the priest. So when they went in there the first time, both of them imagined, because they had no concept of what could be going on in this town, they just imagined a priest was there, and he probably looked up at us because we were interrupting this funeral ceremony, complete with sound effects of people like murmuring and grieving and organ music and all this stuff. It's a brilliant touch that they didn't have to include in this movie, but it's a nice detail.
Yeah, no, it's a great detail, and it also features the artwork of Vincent, because the way it's shot, it's done fairly quickly, so people do look realistic, especially the priest. You find out later on the priest was a wax figure.
Mhm.
They also do that later on when Carly is getting chased and she gets captured by Bo, because she's on the run from Bo a couple of times. At one point, she trips when she runs out of the church, and he holds her down. She thinks she sees a real person move a curtain, and who lives in the house. And then we find out later, once Carly gets rescued by her brother, Nick, we find out that's a wax on a motor. So this town is fascinating. It's fascinating what these brothers have set up, and I think that's what helped brings it a little bit above what you might expect, because you look at the work that was put into this town, that they thought enough to where, well, if someone comes in, they may look at the window of this old lady, so we'll make it look like an old lady, or we'll look at like a funeral's going on. I mean, these guys thought it out.
Well, it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, because this movie would not have gotten made, I'm convinced, if Texas Chainsaw Massacre hadn't kicked open the door and been
Oh
such
yeah.
a smash hit.
Mhm.
But and I wasn't a fan of that movie. I like Texas Massacre: The Beginning, which came out like around this, I think, the same time as this movie, better than I
Okay.
liked the remake. But
Wow.
I feel like if that movie hadn't happened, and yet Jean Colette Serra and whoever, did he write this as well?
I believe no.
No, Charles
You had
Belden, Chad
and Chad
Hayes,
Hayes
and
and
Carrie
Carrie
Hayes. Yeah.
Hayes.
If they had just written this as it was, with as
Mhm.
sort of with inspiration from Texas Chainsaw, because you can't convince me that that they weren't.
No, they're yeah. It's definitely got
Then I think this would have struck out as being, instead of just like, oh, they just ripped off the formula of the movie that came out 2 years ago. It would have been
Mhm.
like, oh, this is kind of an interesting take on this movie from the 50s, but mixing it with a Texas Chainsaw aesthetic instead of just feeling like a ripoff. Because you're right, there's some artistic flair and care that went into this. I feel like the people making it didn't weren't aware of other horror movies. They thought that they were breaking new ground, even though we as the audience, like, yeah, we've seen 100 of these things in the last half decade.
Well, you don't know how long the project's been sitting out there before it gets greenlit. I mean, we've
Yep.
had that discussion about producers, and the studio may have been sitting on this for a little while, because these are the writers that would go on later on to bring us the Conjuring universe. The guys who wrote the screenplay here wrote the Conjuring films. So, I mean, and those just took off. So they may have been sitting on this for a while, and then the studio sees, oh, hey, that Texas Chainsaw film came out. Oh, Saw's now. Oh, horror, not just horror, but rated R, more mature horror is coming back. Oh, we can do this gritty films now. It was just an interesting time for horror, with these remakes of making the more mature or more violent versions of, say, the original. And sometimes they turned out better, some of them not. But maybe they've been sitting on this for a while. But you do see a lot of influences. For me, when I was watching, I'm like, oh, it's folks in the 2000s trying to replicate the magic or whatever of a regular slasher film. But for me, like I said, the runtime, I don't mind the runtime. It's just that there's bits and pieces in here they could have taken out. Like they didn't need the friends necessarily to go get caught in traffic and come back.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
You know?
They could have stayed put at the campground while
Right.
the other two went to get the fan belt, and then nothing would have
Ye
changed.
Yeah, and it, because that at them gone, yeah, it gives you the idea of these folks being stranded, but you had that already because they head off into the truck with the crazy roadkill guy. You know, and they drive, he says 15 miles away. So they're, it's not like it's just around the corner. So these
Right.
folks could have stayed at the camp. You still could have had the thing where you know, the couple wanted to make out, and you know, the camera guy is like, okay, I'm third wheel. You know, you could have done all of that and trimmed some of that out, because it almost takes you a little bit away from the atmosphere and it brings you back, and then you're just like, oh yeah, they're in the creepy town, you know. And for me, I guess the only thing that gets me at it, they do that trope of all horror, of many slasher films, is I'm like, how do you not suspect this? You know, yeah. How do I mean, the guy, Bo telegraphs quite a, you know, I just like, no. Maybe it's because I've been in enough small towns. I'm like,
You know, that's probably playing up to some kind of, you know, elitism. Like, what are they gonna do? They're
yeah.
idiots. You know, they're rednecks and they're harmless. Although they do get kind of freaked out when they see the giant pit of dead animals that they fall into, which was just, I mean, that hats off. That was a true. I wanted to wash my hands after seeing Alicia Cuthbert struggle through that pile of guts. That was amazing.
Oh, the pile of guts was, that visceral look was just amazing, and that's where the horror element takes. But that's almost an hour. You're almost an hour into the film when that actually happens. Not quite, but close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, if you look at, you know, why didn't they suspect anything?
Mm.
One thing that was kind of obnoxious, and I think they definitely could have trimmed out, was Wade when he's going up to the house to use the bathroom and Carly is staying behind in the truck.
Mhm.
He like wanders off into this room and starts finding all this weird stuff and like making like he's like talking to himself and like, oh, what's this? I'm like, no, because you don't know who else is in that house. I mean, you got freaked out enough by the giant pickup truck, which of course it turns out was the same creepy pickup truck that they got, you know,
Mhm.
driven there in. But yeah, it's just it was dumb
Mhm.
slasher teenager behavior that I think this movie's better than
Well,
that.
it did. Well, that's the thing, is once you start getting into things, I think is where I get, you know, the film really turns for me, is when it starts to get into the actual horror stuff, and you know, because I find the story of the two brothers interesting. You find why the town is the way it is interesting. It just takes a while to get there. And I think many people check out because Carly is supposed to be kind of the most charismatic, and we find out later that her troublemaker ex-con brother Nick actually has a heart of why he went to jail in the first place, which was to actually protect his buddy Dalton with the camera. Um, you know, so this brother sister are supposed to be the ones you connect. It was kind of hard. I mean, Carly, yeah, and Nick later on, maybe I feel a little bit more warmed up to him, but the rest of their crew were fodder, and that's fine because I didn't give a rat's ass about any of them.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
there's
the
the
video camera guy.
yeah, me well, the thing is, like, and this is we kind of talked about this, but it was such a trope in the early 2000s of
Mhm.
having the
Yeah.
video camera guy, you know, down to like Cloverfield and all this other stuff that they all just kind of become the same person.
Mhm.
Um, there's a porno movie called Camp Cuddly Pines Slumber Party Massacre or something like that, and even that had a guy with a video camera. And it came out in like
That's a
2005 or
hell
something.
that's a hell of a title. How do you fit that on the VHS box? Oh, wait, it's 2000, so DVD,
That's
so
not the only thing you have to worry about fitting in a box. But by the
wow.
way, it's amazing. So, but no, like Robert Richard.
Richard, yes.
It's Richard with an apostrophe between the I and the
Mhm.
C. That's awesome. He plays Blake, and then Paris Hilton
Plays his girlfriend Paige.
Paige. Yeah, they, their whole thing is they just want to, make out with each other, but she's got to tell him that she thinks that she might be pregnant, and they never really answer that question. And I feel like the filmmakers trying to be kind of edgy, like, would we kill a pregnant girl?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Friday the 13th Part 3 beat them to it, 20 years earlier. But it is still that kind of like, what are we doing here? Because it keeps coming
Mhm.
up, and there's like conversations between the girls about, like, do we tell them, and are you sure? And like, that's not what this movie's about.
But it's brief though, too. The conversations are brief. That's another thing to where you could kind of take. You're right about it being edgy, but actually, it doesn't really play into it at all. I mean, I could see, and folks, I'm prefacing this now that I'm doing this as an observation and not as I want any ill will, and nor do I have a. Well, okay, I do have a twisted brain, but still, the way she dies, you would think, okay, we're setting up the whole she might be pregnant, so she gets maybe stabbed in the belly first and then killed, that way, but she doesn't. She gets a good old spike to the head, and then he just pushes her straight down this whole pipe right through Paris Hilton's face. Excuse me, Paige's face. Brutal, and it looks awesome. Practical effects in here, folks. Wow. But at the same time, you're like, I forgot she even was pregnant by that time when she was, or could be pregnant, because they don't establish for sure whether or not she actually is. And it doesn't really play into it. It's like they're trying to add a little bit more layers to these characters, but is it really needed?
Yeah, I mean, the only way I think it makes sense really is if when she's in that factory or whatever, where
Mhm.
all the cars and stuff, and she's being chased by the killer, if she begs for her life and says, please, I have a baby, or
Mhm.
something like that, and either he lets her go, or he doesn't care, or she dies on accident or something. Either way,
Right.
yeah, I joked at the time, and I still amused myself by thinking it's the second time in a year at this point that Paris Hilton has become famous for her head sliding down a pole.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, forgive me.
Zing.
Yeah.
Wow, man. That where do you go from there? No, but you're right. But again, it's elements like that, and I think they throw in a few other elements in here too. Like there's this, you never really feel it. It's almost like just like the pregnancy subplot, if you want to call it that, with Paige. Carly and Wade supposedly have this bit of thing with them because Carly's headed off to New York to be a photographer and get an internship, and Wade is sitting on the fence of whether or not he's going to go with her.
Yeah.
But their argument about it is almost like backhanded comments or offhanded comments while they're looking at like wax figures and that, and it barely comes up again. I mean, you know what I mean? You would think that this conversation is supposed to have a little more weight, and it doesn't. It's almost like, oh wait, we got to throw in some character development here. I don't want to go to New York, and well, I want to go to New York. Okay, I love you. I love you too. Oh, look at the beautiful wax dummy.
It's the only thing I can think of is it's something that I generally admire in horror movies, which is the idea
Mhm.
that you have people just living their regular lives, and they've got their
Yeah,
own dramas and things, and then they're cut short or interrupted by these horrors that befall them.
right.
But there's a way to do it well, and then there's the House of Wax way, in which I'm sitting there, I'm looking at runtime like, yeah, you don't need the New York subplot, you don't need the pregnancy subplot. Let's come on.
We don't need to go get tickets. You already established you're not going to get tickets, from the scalper or whatnot. Why are you even going? And you could have trimmed it down a little bit. And the reason I say that is you're going into a horror film and you get it teased and you see the trailer and that. I remember the trailer for this too. It's like, um, okay, Paris Hilton's in here, and she wasn't really that great in the media spotlight at that point in pop culture. She was, not quite looked too high upon, or even, whatever. Sure, her name was out there, but not for necessarily the way
Well,
why you would want your name out there.
no, I mean that you are remembering it correctly and incorrectly.
Okay.
She was insanely popular around this time. Now, it wasn't cool to like Paris Hilton.
That's
but there's no denying that she was a megastar at this point. Yeah.
See, and then, dang it. No, I don't want to leave. Okay, sorry.
Oh, sorry, you froze
Pause
there for a second.
Froze there for a minute. I have no idea what's going on with the computer today. But yeah, that's that's what I was thinking of, is the fact that it wasn't cool to like Paris Hilton. You're right, she was popular, but it wasn't exactly if you said you liked Paris Hilton, you were usually berated or given a hard time about, oh, whatever, why you like, so there is that with her. But it's just, I don't know. If you stayed more with the horror element, I think I would have liked it a little bit more when I first saw it. Watching it now, it doesn't bother me as much because we've been through many 2-hour movies and horror films, so it doesn't bother me as much. But looking at it going, if you just trimmed out some of those things and kept with that creepy atmosphere, I think you'd have a better horror film than what you have, because those elements, those kind of CW or WB, those youth storylines that we had seen in TV being brought kind of to a horror film, while they might give characters a little bit more depth for this type of film, it's like, do you really need that in here? Because I will say that the Carly and Nick dynamic is interesting enough, and you have interesting enough setting and kind of villains that I don't think you need really to add the extra subplots in there, especially if you're going to do them like just briefly mention and go on. I mean, I never felt like this was an actual problem between Carly and Wade. It never really quite felt that serious, even though the subject and what was happening it was just like the pregnancy. It just didn't feel like serious. I'm like, why are you even, you're in a house completely made of wax, and that's far more fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're gonna make them be the final two instead of the brother and sister, because at the end you could say, "Look, I'm coming to New York with you."
Right.
We've been through this whole thing together. We can conquer anything, even the Big Apple, something like that. But no, this movie reminded me of other movies, which was kind of fun. A couple of references even to Head of the Family. The whole idea of like the the detour, like there's a weird, creepy backwoods detour. There's the house at the very end catching on fire and everything just kind of going to hell in the climax.
That is similar. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. There was something else that, let me see. What? When they meet up with the Roadkill Driver.
Yes.
I was getting flashbacks again to a movie that wouldn't come out for another 5 years, but Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Yes.
Because I was like, this guy could just be harmless. I don't know if he's part of this, murderous cabal that we're going to run into, but there's just all these misunderstandings. Like he was just trying to be nice to people. Like, oh my God, he's a murderer. Oh, so good.
It was, yeah. I liked that guy, and they even play a little misdirection early on with him, with a hand sticking out of the pile of roadkill, and it turns out to be a mannequin hand. He's like, oh no, it's a mannequin hand. But they use this as a reason for Alicia Cuthbert to remove the modest shirt that she had into the tank top that she would be wearing for the rest, like you said, the Jessica Biel tank top that she'd be wearing for the rest of the film.
It was just such an eye roll. Like, I feel like
it was.
I don't think I did this in the theater at the time because I didn't pick up on it, but like I just imagine being in a theater and just like everybody going, oh, like when that tank top comes out.
It was like the tank top comes out, well, one, the way Chad Michael Murray takes off the tank top too. He's like, to show off his pecs. So he's showing off his shirtless self as well. And then, he gives it to his girl, to his sister to wear, and you're like, it's like, can you be any more obvious?
Yeah.
She did bring another change of shirt back at the tent or whatever. You're gonna have her change now,
Well, look, if I was in a pile of months old roadkill guts, I'd want to get out of that as soon as possible. I'm just kind of surprised she didn't take off the bra too, and
I would, in a good way, but you almost expect the way the whole thing is just shot and set up. You're just like, oh, and of course, our roadkill boys are like,
and you got Dalton like holding up his shirt or something, like trying to shield her. Yeah.
Wade he steps in front between her and the roadkill guy. And they're suspected of the roadkill guy. They're like, oh no, we'll walk. And like, oh, I'll give you a ride. They're like, oh, that's very nice of you. Like, wow. I'm like, you guys turned on a trusty dime.
Yeah, that was a little too convenient there.
It was.
I'm trying to see.
We gotta go ahead. I was gonna say.
No, you had.
I was just gonna say we just have a couple comments here. From Mr. Infobomb. He stated that Beale was in Seventh Heaven, which aired on the WB and many WB stations. Later became part of the CW network, so it's halfway to CW status. Yeah, that's true. And you had UPN in there as well, which got absorbed. And Paris Hilton is not my idea of a talented actress by Mr. Robert Bond. Does anyone think she is? Depends on the role. You know.
I thought she was good in this. I mean, like, it's one of those things where, and again, it goes back to her being a very divisive pop cultural figure, because she's, a millionaire or a billionaire at this point. She's, rich and entitled, and she's on TV, and she had a sex tape, and she's famous for all the wrong reasons and stuff. So it's easy to put on the hate watch Paris Hilton hat when watching House of Wax. But if you're evaluating her performance honestly, she's no worse than the best friend who's bound to get murdered in any of these horror movies. I mean, she can act. There is a difference between people who cannot act and people who can't act well, and people who aren't impressive, and then there's like stars. And I think she's fine in this movie.
She can act given the right roles. It just depends on what roles she ends up able to get. And unfortunately, put in a specific category in Hollywood, it's really hard to get out of that category at all and maybe play a different role. Not that she's at the caliber at all of Kristen Stewart, but Kristen Stewart for a while had the Twilight, yoke around her neck whenever she would appear on screen or in some project. People would call her Bella, though she had other projects that she was phenomenal in, and it was because of the script or the part she ended up getting or the director. So
it's a great comparison, because I remember, like, during that whole bit where the Twilight movies were coming out, I mean, I was not impressed with her as an actress, because I felt that she had a thing. This is before she started doing movies really beyond the range of Twilight, like the whole kind of art scene she got into.
Yeah.
Because she had that, she would carry that Twilight shtick over into everything, where she's putting her hair back behind her ear and kind of like, like whatever. I'm like, do you need to see a doctor? What's going on? But it's the same thing with Paris Hilton. It's very easy to take one thing and just kind of like brand her with that, that broad brush. For Robert or you, Mark, or anybody else who's interested, there's a great documentary from a couple years ago called This Is Paris, which is about her life and some of the things that she's gone through, what it's like to just be Paris Hilton. Actually know the director, Alex Dean. She lived with Paris Hilton for a while and got all this, raw footage and stuff. So it really is an on the ground, on the scene film. So yeah, it's easy to make fun of her as a pop icon, but to experience her as a human being, I mean, I'm not saying it's a performance, but if you're wondering if she has the capacity with, as you say, the right material, what could she do? I think the answer is in that documentary.
Nice. I'll have to see check that out because, yeah, it's one of those things where typecasting happens. You get pigeonholed, and it feels bad because you feel bad for the actors because they can't seem to sometimes shake that. I mean, poor Mark Hamill, for the longest time, he get a role and go, oh look, Luke's in this one. He's like, what is it? And then he did the voice acting in Batman the Animated Series, still my favorite animated series of all time, and not just because it's Batman. But I remember the first time I saw the Joker, this was before internet was huge, so you didn't quite go look. You're watching it, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's an awesome Joker. And then you saw in the credits, you're like, wait, Mark Hamill is the Joker?
There was a guy named Mark Hamill who played Luke Skywalker. What are the odds? Weird.
No way. But it takes that to kind of break that yoke. And I think, especially with her and her family history and the whole thing in the real world and pop culture, you've got that around her. But there is talent there. And I've kind of learned that over the years with it, because when she was first out and it was pop culture and you're buried in the middle of it and you're still kind of young, you're like, oh yeah, the minute you even mention the name, you're just like, what, you like her? I'm like, what? No. Nah. But bringing it back to this film, it's like, do you like this film? Wow. Yeah. I think there's a lot to like in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, yeah, there's some cool stuff going here. Another scene that I thought was really well filmed was Carly gets cornered in the basement of the house, ends up in the kind of the workshop, strapped to a chair. Bo super glues her mouth shut.
Yeah.
And it's not even like a wildly elaborate gag of her like getting her mouth back open. It looks just realistically painful. Like, oh my God, my mouth, my lips hurt right now trying to imagine prying them apart. But she eventually escapes, and that's Nick ends up in the street, like in the auto shop, talking to Bo, like, hey, have you seen my sister? And at one point, she gets her hand up into the grate, like the sewer grate, and she's like feeling around trying to signal for her brother. Bo sees this, Nick does not. Bo kneels down, and from Nick's point of view, we're looking down on him, and he's got a shoelace flopped out like he's tying his boot, and what he's doing is reaching into his pocket to get out some fucking like
snips,
snips, and he cuts off the tip of her finger. It's just so well done.
And what's even better, what is the coup de grace of that scene, if you will, is he doesn't just cut off the tip of the finger. He then picks it up and puts it in his pocket for later, for keepsies, which just adds that little extra level to it. And yeah, the fact that he does that while the brother is right there. Now, the only thing I will say is you do get the come on moment. She's got a metal bar hanging from her wrist, and there's plenty of pipes there that she could have banged on with it rather than just sticking her finger through the grate. Because I mean, it's literally dangling from her arm, because she manages to get an arm free.
Yeah,
that's attached to a metal bar, and there's lots of other metal pipes there. And if her mouth is, what I'm just saying, and I understand panic in the moment or whatnot, but still, they do play her character as being, she is has some critical thinking, to put it that way, and that just surprised me that she wouldn't have thought that she figured sticking her finger through the grate and through the, rather than grabbing the metal that's on her wrist and banging it against the other metal. I think that's the only part of that scene where I kind of wish they would have handled it differently. But Nick here is at least showing his street smarts of going, not trusting this Bo guy, really, even when Bo thinks he's got him convinced.
Yeah, it's just some nice interplay there.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I like Chad Michael Murray a lot. I just feel like you needed someone who had more of a not badass, but just more of a villainous kind of
Mhm.
character to him. Because the moment I saw him and he's like drinking and he's the bad brother, I'm like, oh, that's right. This is, not even in 2005, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I forgot. He's just going to be the guy who's like the bad brother, but he's not really that bad and he's going to survive.
Mhm.
And I think it would have been interesting if there had been more of a contrast, if he had been more sinister and greasy like Bo. So his hero turn was more of a revelation instead of like, oh, yeah, it's the CW guy. Of course, he's going to be the hero.
Though Chad Michael Murray, he'd go on later. He's actually one of my favorite parts of the movie Fortress with Mr. Bruce Willis,
Hmm.
which came out. That was part of my Willis Watch
That's right.
series
Yeah.
of reviews. He was in that, and he was one of the best parts because he played the crazy villain there. Almost wish that villain was in House of Wax because he sells it. He just chews up the scenery. And in here, yeah, I would have liked it. I think it would have been a little bit more creepy for the Bo character to stay in that suit that he was in with the funeral.
Yeah.
Because you do have Nick, who's kind of the clean cut ex-con brother, who you never really get the impression that, yeah, he's been in trouble, but he's still got, you never really feel like this is the bad boy, like the evil brother. He even says it, but Bo, when we first meet him, he's all up in black and got his hair slicked back and looks totally not like you would expect in a kind of backwoods town like they portray it in. And if you would have, I think, stayed with that image, I think it would have been a better contrast between him and Nick. Otherwise, there really wasn't.
Well, I mean, there's the whole notion of siblings. I think you could have played with because you've got the
Yeah.
two siblings, the evil, and the two siblings who
Mhm.
are the good ones, and one pair dies and the other pair
Right.
lives. But I think you really could have done something with that because Carly was a photographer, which is an artistic inclination, and Nick was
Mhm.
not. It is a nice pairing. I feel like there was a draft or two where they dug into this more, and then they're like, "No, this is a horror movie. We got to get this out in front of like as many eyeballs as possible. Leave your highfalutin, psychology couch shit on the cutting room floor."
Well, let's not forget that Carly and Nick are twins. They
Yeah.
they mention at one point that they're twins, that she's the good twin and he's the evil twin. And then you've got the Bo and Vincent characters who are also twins. Yes, if you aren't noticing the parallel between these two, one's artistic, like you said, one's evil, and it's touched on but not fully explored more than could have been interesting in that it would have been interesting to see a bit more of a back and forth between the pairs
Mhm.
of siblings versus just going on right away to the killing. Granted, I'm not usually one for like exposition and heavy dialogue, but I think you could have played, like you said, done some interesting interactions or explorations with the two pairs of siblings, either one strapped to a chair and talking or whatever, something.
But I mean, all we get though, especially with Vincent and Bo, is just a rehash of like Chop Top and Leatherface.
Yeah.
You know, it's just it's so bad. I mean,
It,
that's the thing is, I keep saying how much like bad stuff there is throughout this movie. But I still really like this movie. I don't know
it's
what's going on.
it's entertaining because it does still have the old school slasher spirit, which is what I noticed a lot more in this one than the first time I watched it. In that it is trying to capture that spirit. You can tell, they've watched other slasher films, and those are influenced here. And as we mentioned tonight, there are a number of scenes throughout this movie that you'll say, "Oh, hey, that's that movie," that Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme going, "Oh, yeah, you're gonna catch them in here."
Oh yeah, there's
Uh,
even the early line on. I think it was from Bo who said, "This town used to really be something until they put in the highway." I'm like, that's right out of Psycho.
right, right, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of other influences put into this film, and It's not as bad as I would say the Rotten Tomatoes rating says, or even some people or some of the flack the film has. I'm not saying it's great cinema by any means, but there is entertainment to be had here. But I fully admit some of it could have used a little more editing and trimmed down to keep more of that horror element, because the horror elements in here are great. I mean, like we mentioned, the makeup and gore effects in here, like when she gets her finger cut off, and like you said with the super glue, and even later on when they run into one of the wax, when she runs into one of the wax figures and the arm falls off and it's actually got a femur, and you could see some, some of the visceral meat. I mean, practical effects wise, they look really good. The makeup effects.
Even some of the digital stuff. I mean, like
Mhm.
when Dalton gets his head cut off, the kind of the crossed blades, and then you see, and it's all from his POV. But then we cut away from that because Vincent, I think it was Vincent,
Yeah.
drags the
Yeah.
body away from the blades, and then his head rolls over and blinks a couple of times at the camera, like, oh.
And it looked good too. I mean, for a 2005 film, that looked good. That was a good gimmick that they had, and they have a few others too in this as well. To where you look at what they did, and you're like, wow, that's actually very cool. That looks really good. Especially like you said, when when he's going after going after Nick and Carly, and Bo is shooting with the double barrel shotgun and he's blowing the heads off the wax figures. You could see like the skull and kind of the brains and such in there.
Oh yeah, and when Bo gets shot with a bow and arrow, or a crossbow, whatever it was,
A
yeah,
crossbow. Oh,
yeah, and he becomes
yeah.
a very cross bow. They leave him for dead, but he comes back, and the scene in the kitchen where he rips the arrow out through the bicep, I'm like, there's no good way to go, because you've got, the flesh on the other side, and then you've got like the crazy metal spike arrow on
Mm-hmm.
the other. Oh my gosh,
And
it's
then
so hard to
and
watch.
he's got an arrow in the chest, which don't think about biology at all, folks, because you'll be just like, no, that punctured a lung. His chest should have exploded by now. But don't think about that. Don't think about that. Okay, because it's a horror film. Don't think about biological logics. What I will say, it does come into play later, though, when he's fighting Nick, and it's funny because I forgot how this film how some of the fights went down. So he's fighting Bo, and I'm like, grab the arrow sticking out of his chest, grab the arrow. And then finally he did it. I'm like, thank you, dude. Because Bo's like choking him and almost getting the other head. And then Nick finally goes, oh, and starts wiggling it. The guy's like, oh, fine. And I'm like, about time. You should have went with that first, The action sequences, I think, are well done. There's some tension in here. When Bo, a great scene, another one of those great moments in this film is where Bo goes into a church after Carly has initially got away from him, and she's hiding in the church. And you don't know exactly where she's hiding, and neither does Bo. And he's searching for her. And it's actually kind of one of the more tension-filled moments, because you're like, is he going to find her or not? And it's done well, and she actually surprises you where she's actually hiding. Because you think maybe it's in the pulpit or underneath the coffin of his mom, which again, psycho callback, keeping mom preserved. Though they did a better job of it than Norman. Norman needed some wax.
Yeah.
He needed some wax, man. Just, preserve mom better. What the heck? Well, he preserved her in his brain though. So there you go.
Well, there's a scene, I think it's the big climactic house chase.
Mhm.
They end up in breaking through a wall or something. And does she put a crib like in front of a door?
Yeah, there's a wax crib. There's a wax crib because they recreate the bedroom when they were a child.
And complete with the conjoined headed babies.
Right.
And I was just thinking, please, let's just get a shot to show that there are not actual like babies in there. Because I was thinking, like,
Yeah,
in order to recreate this scene, they could have
had
abducted some toddlers or some infants
and covered in wax. Yeah,
right. But they're very, very clearly hollow, like a chocolate Easter bunny.
Well, they were even brown, so like chocolate. So it made me think of chocolate actually. Like, oh,
I don't want to eat during this movie.
but we do get that symbolism in there too. So.
Right. And even there's some really nice symbolism. Like again, it's easy to write this movie off, but the people behind it, you can tell they had some kind of a vision or they want to put a stamp on it because at the end when Vincent is finally, Bo is defeated, he dies on the kind of the ground level, and then there's a big fight on the second floor. Everything starts to melt because everything's on fire. Vincent, I think, gets tossed or falls through the floor or something, and he falls and he lands directly on his brother, and then they start to melt into the ground like they're descending into hell. But it's like stomach to or like
stomach to back, so yeah,
stomach to back, just as the way they were born,
right?
With the complete with their heads in the same position.
Yeah, and Vincent is the one that ended up losing more of his face from the surgery, and it's that side of the face is actually laying on his brother's face, and they're looking at the camera. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the thing is there's care put in some of these shots and the symbolism, like we mentioned with the crib. There's the wax babies that are the conjoined who get cut in half when Vincent is going after Carly, and he cuts through the wax door, and he cuts through the babies as well. So I mean, they're trying to do something. If you could get over the clunky parts, there's some good stuff in here actually.
Yeah, I get a feeling there's a lot of either on set or in the concept stage of wouldn't it be cool if instead of, okay, here's where he chases her, and then how can we kill her in a creative way? And, no, that's like, hey, let's draw on the duality of these characters and do some really creative stuff. And I loved at the end when Carly and Nick are escaping this burning house, they actually push out through the House of Wax logo.
Yes,
it's kind of a neat effect.
Well, what's even better is they're on the second floor. The whole staircase and everything is melted away. The balcony that they were on was melted away, and that's when they figured they could dig through the wall. And they're with the House of Wax, but the house starts to melt. So you're like, well, how are they going to get down? Because they're like on a second story. But the sign melt as the house melts, they get lowered to the ground floor, and then they could just crawl out onto the ground. And I liked that bit too. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And even you mentioned the hook with the roadkill driver at the end. I don't even know if I know it was meant to be a hook, but they don't mention that character as being connected to anything. They, in terms of what's going on at the house or that town, it's possible he was involved in it, but they don't make reference to there being a third person, except for the fact that he was the third sibling. Like, I don't know if they were triplets or they just had, if she had 3 babies.
They don't say for sure. It's just the cops did a report in the CDIC or whatever. They looked up in the database, and she had 3 babies, not 2 sons.
And Carly is, when she's driving away, she sees him with the dog that had been in the house and all that stuff. So it's entirely possible. But he could also have disowned these brothers and be like, that's why. Oh, and help me out with something. This is 15 miles away from where the cars broke down, like that campsite.
Yes.
Why did Vincent go out there to kill Blake and go after Paige?
That was what I was trying to figure out. And it seems like Bo was even trying to figure that out, because Bo said, you're not supposed to leave anywhere without me. But Vincent was out there before. He was the one, I think, with the camera, and he's the one that cut the belt, I think. I don't think it was Bo. I think it may have been well, no, it would have probably been Bo, because Bo was out there earlier and he knew they were out there. But
yeah,
I just
realized that Roadkill Driver guy, it was his truck, and that's when Carly realized it and put it together, right?
Well,
no, that was Bo's truck, right?
It was Bo's truck, because Wade goes in to use the bathroom. She can't wait in the truck anymore, so she goes out to the porch, tries to call her friends. She turns around, and then she's like, "Oh shit! There's the broken headlight from when Nick threw the bottle at it." So I think Vincent was going out because he was curious, because it had to be Vincent that cut the belt on the truck, because he had the camera and he was videotaping them and he took the camera with him, and we see that he has the camera later because he does a film shot of the pipe going through through Paige's head, and then he films that. So, I think he was trying to kind of not break away from Bo, but do his own thing, be kind of branch out. And I think that was his main motivation. He wanted to go out and do something because he's always in the, making the wax figures. It's always Bo who gets to go out and have fun,
Well,
fun,
I feel like, I feel like we got another kind of a teaser for a possible sequel, because I think it was Nick, when he was going through the town, he saw a sign for Trudy's Town of Wax.
Yeah.
So I could imagine, like, the next one would have been like City of Wax or Town of Wax or something.
Town of Wax would be cool. I would have seen Town of Wax. No, but the hook, like we mentioned with I am impressed because you get there's another sibling. So you're waiting for the nurse in the ambulance or the ambulance driver to be driving, and they show the name tag, and it shows, whatever, Clayton, the name of the last name of it, you know what I'm saying? You could have easily done that. And the most that they do is that they show the Roadkill Driver with the dog that was hanging around with Bo and Vincent after they mention the third sibling. So it makes you wonder, he is a third sibling, but he looks at Carly and Nick through the window of the ambulance just with a smile, and not like a sinister, like, I want revenge smile, or I'm going to get you. He's just like, oh, bye, and I like that. And that's one of the there's a few instances throughout the film where they do buck your expectation. Not a lot, but they do at least a little bit throw you a curve as well. They try. So.
Yeah. And again, I think this is just a movie that you need. Well, if this is the first time you're seeing it, it's probably fine. But for me, I needed that distance of a decade and a half to fully appreciate it.
Well, I think the distance, as well as, like you mentioned, the pop culture, how buried this was in the pop culture because of real life events, especially with Paris Hilton, but just in general, they were all on CW shows and such. And it just the way it was different. And I think being distanced, you don't have that now. And now you can a little bit more have that separation and just look at the film, as its own thing. And as its own thing, it's not great, but it's not horrible either. It's a slasher film. It goes a little solid, long, but yeah. So there you have it, folks. House of Wax. We've both kind of changed our opinions a little bit over the years with it, whether it's the amount of films we've watched or the fact that we have been able to have that distance to where we could just look at the film on its own. And it's got talent. Everybody in here, that's the thing, is it's well acted. Really, I mean, you're not like through the roof, like, oh my God, but it's well acted. These are experienced actors. They didn't just grab people and this is their first film. And yeah, I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Ian, as always. And now, as here we are, the license to shill is yours, sir. Please plug away.
Well, my name's Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I'm also on YouTube, which you can find on YouTube. Look up Kicking the Seat and you'll find me there. Do movie reviews and interviews and roundtables and all sorts of fun stuff. And we just celebrated 800 episodes of the audio podcast. And Mark was goodly enough to join us on a roundtable last night for a wonderful movie called RRR. I want to plug that. I think we've talked around it on this show, mostly with you recommending it to me and me saying, yeah, I'll get around to it. I finally did. And it's a life-changing, wonderful movie that you can watch on Netflix, and you should.
It's a beautiful film, folks. It's got something for everyone. Don't let the runtime scare you or subtitles. I adore that film. And watching it the second time for your show, I adored it even more.
I've been putting up like thumbnails and stuff to promote the episode and like reminders and things, and just looking up the images and putting together thumbnails. I'm like, I want to watch this again. It feels with such positivity.
It is. So yeah, check out episode 800 of that, where we talk our great stuff, Ian. Always great stuff to have you on the show. Angelique and Ray unfortunately could not make it tonight. You are with us in spirit. We appreciate you. I appreciate all the listeners out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Infobomb, always glad to have you, as well as our other live viewers who tuned in tonight. For me, plugging things, Sawdust City Fright Fest, second weekend in October, 7th and 8th. Indie cinema, lots of Wisconsin films being featured. We are featuring Rise, made by Mr. Cole Meredith, who has been on the Spoiler Room many times, Spoiler Room crew and friend of the podcast, and myself. He will be there with his film Rise Friday night, and then Saturday we got a slew of films and filmmaker Q&As. So, I mean, come on, come to Oshkosh and see it. And then the next weekend is the Twisted Dreams Horror Film Festival. So check that out. That's in Milwaukee at the Atmospheric Theater, the Avalon. So it's not quite as far as Oshkosh, but both are going to be worth the trip, folks. So check those things out. And yeah.
We actually have another comment if you want to get to it.
We do. Oh, look at this. And we've got a comment from Drawdown. Hey, nice. Okay. I'm horrible with reading names. I apologize. Drawdown says, nice job, guys. Glad I got to catch one of these. Well, we are glad you were able to catch one of these as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. I always appreciate it to have people watch, because, yeah, it's cool to have you and have your folks' opinions in the comments. So thank you so much. And now we will just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.